What's up? For those who don't know, or those who maybe do Facebook Live a little bit more often, apparently there's a thing at the top up here where you can change it to do just audio. So, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe that could be a thing for the podcast. I have a feeling you'd miss seeing my face, though. Don't you think? Whoa! We're falling to pieces. Okay. Here we go. We're going to start it up. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Khanna. Happy Monday, or maybe it's Tuesday if you're up late overseas or up early maybe. Welcome to the Emulsion, episode 17, a show where I talk about chefs and restaurateurs. And why is that not recording? That's strange. Let's start it over. Very, very strange. You get it all real and unedited on this show. So let's start it over one more time. You get that spiel once more. There we go. What's up, folks? My name's Justin Khanna. Happy Monday, or maybe happy Tuesday if you're up late overseas. Welcome to the Emulsion, episode 17, a show where I talk about chef and restaurants and fine dining news that basically mattered to me in the last week or so. It is a late one here in Seattle. I really, really wish I could have kind of a promised time that I go live for you, especially the Facebook Live people, but, I'm busy. There's a lot of stuff going on. I hope you listen to this podcast on your own time anyways, whether that's on iTunes or maybe on YouTube or on Facebook. However you consume this is just, a little bit of extra behind the scenes content for you if you're watching on live, some sort of video platform. Today's beverage is water. It's literally just water. I've had a total of probably 3 caffeinated beverages since 8 a.m. today. And just to make sure I actually can get some sleep tonight, we're just going to go on hydration station with my trusty Nalgene water bottle. If you saw me drink out of that, carry this thing around everywhere. So let's start it up, shall we? And the first story that I want to talk about is a story that I saw personally all over my newsfeed, my personal news feeds over this past week. And you might have seen it too. The article was titled 12 Chefs and Restaurateurs on the Biggest Sources of Conflict in the Industry. And this actually had more substance than I thought it would, Like, I naturally assume that a clickbaity title like that, any of those numbered lists, tend to be a little bit more headlines, get you to click, get you to, consume it a little bit. And sometimes that's bad because you end up getting false information just because you ended up clicking on it. But I thought it was going to be disappointing, and it actually comes from a topic that was proposed at an event called Welcome Conference, which was a summit that was organized by Will Guidara and Anthony Rudolph. So they're from EMP 11 Madison Park and Per Se / Journey, respectively. Those two gentlemen also like titans in the front of house sphere. So they proposed this question to people at this summit, this event. What is the greatest conflict in the industry to you? And I'm going to kind of share a few from these industry leaders, and then I'm going to kind of share my own personal reactions to their biggest conflicts. And then this is also a great place for you to kind of share your own opinions as a listener about your greatest conflict. And as I go through these other chefs' ideas, maybe that'll give you some inspiration. But if you're watching this live, I'd really, really love for this to be our question of the day. And I'd like you to kind of insert it now as you kind of go through this, as we go through this together. So let me know your conflicts. I'd love to know, and then we can kind of include those as other people's opinions. But I'll also give my own kind of gripes and what I personally think are some big conflicts. But first I'll start with a gentleman by the name of Patrick O'Connell, who is at the Inn at Little Washington. And he says, and I quote, "I think we need to have more empathy. The restaurant industry isn't isolated. Our collective anxiety level is extraordinarily high right now, and it's affecting people's concentration and their ability to perform. So much of what we are about is taking people out of their reality and making them happy, putting them in a festive frame of mind. The first thing you have to realize is that your own troops have got to feel that way in order to convey it. The question is now, how do you get your people to feel that in spite of having everything going on around them? That they can be upbeat, fresh-faced, charming, and happy for their guests, because the guests aren't going to come back if they don't have a good time. End quote. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you know this, right? I 100% agree here. I'm huge on empathy. I value it over cooking competency, right? I would much rather have a cook that has the skills to not only understand what's happening to the people around him or her, or more importantly, the guest that is sitting hopefully in the chair, either in the dining room or straight across from them, if they're in sort of a counter style environment. But what stuck out for me here is how he references how restaurants are one of the last places where people can go and sort of escape, right? And how huge of an opportunity that is as people who cater to people in restaurants. And to me, when I thought about it, it's so crazy. And only until I started to really like dig into it and think about it, I think that with the exception that you have, with the exception of sometimes you have that person at your table that kind of starts these conversations about either bad or controversial things that are happening. I know that personally when I go out, my girlfriend and I, we love to go out to eat just because we can kind of enjoy the food and the drink and each other's company without kind of getting struck by advertisements or any news or politics or any of that. And we aren't big people into that, and we have our own opinions that we have mutual understandings about, but we're not going to go into that. But when you're sitting down, you are basically having a table and food. There's no screens, right? There's no opportunity for any of that to happen. So I thought that was an interesting point, and I had never really thought about that until he mentioned that. Next up, David Chang speaks from a chef's perspective, and he says that himself, all about literally staying alive financially and physically. He asks a lot of rhetorical questions in his quote that he gave to the article, and I'm quoting again, "Things are moving so fast, it's hard to find your voice in terms of what you want to do. There's so much criticism, so much need to stay relevant, that it's hard to even keep your sanity." But so how do you keep everyone happy? And at the same time, how do you grow? How do you stay relevant? How do you grow in a meaningful way? End quote. And no one has the answer to this yet, right? And if you ask questions like this and you provide the answer, I feel like it quickly becomes saturated, right? Like we're in such a shared economy and shared idea pool that if you have a solution to a problem, everybody kind of jumps on it, which is great because if you can manage to either make that part of your legacy or find a way to maybe profit on it, it's great in that way. But at the same time, once you do that and things do become saturated, you are literally no longer relevant because you end up becoming a commodity. And it's one of the reasons that I personally started doing content, started kind of putting myself out there a little bit more, expressing my thoughts and my ideas on these platforms and these places online where people's attention is, so that relevancy aspect for me can hopefully grow. And of course, with things like this, things like the Emulsion, it's all about you guys, right? I want to make sure that I'm giving you facts in the right way, and of course my opinion from someone who doesn't just read headlines. Whoa, I read into it a little bit more. But as far as David Chang's quote, I agree. But I'd like to see a little bit more ambition and a little bit less ego from these guys. It's great to pose these questions, but I would like to see a little bit less, how could this hurt my restaurant in the short term, and how could this provide a legacy play for me long term? I think that would be really interesting to see, especially from these guys that are operating at the highest level. Brian Canlis from here in Seattle, he has him and his family have a restaurant called Canlis here in Seattle, and he was at the conference. He actually talked about, and I'm quoting again, "the inequality of pay between front of house and back of house. It's been building for 20 years. I know different cities are working on legislation to address this, but they're not writing it with restaurants in mind. We think about it all the time at Canlis," end quote. Again, for me, this is less, I would love to see less thinking and more action. I know that they've been around forever, and it's easy for me to kind of just say do it rather than what it's like to actually implement it when you're in an establishment like that. But from my point of view, when you build a business model one way, what did he say, 20 years ago, and then decide to kind of make a moral decision that kind of financially impacts your operations, it's really not easy to pivot like that without either losing people or, kind of denting the entire business when you kind of make a pivot like that. So I'd prefer to see restaurants start from the ground up with these things in mind, and kind of hearing these thoughts from veterans can make sure that history doesn't repeat itself, right? So you can hear these people who have been in it for 20 years saying, I wish we could have done it this way. I think if we take those things to heart when we end up, being the next generation, we can make sure that we don't make those same mistakes. And those are more or less the ones that stuck out to me from this article. I'm sure you've maybe read it over your weekend or over your week on your time off. But if you did read it and have other thoughts or other quotes that stuck out, I think there's maybe like 12 or 15 different people that they highlight in the article itself. I think that's probably the point of the article, 12 conflicts. I should pay more attention to those numbers in the headlines. I just go for the substance. But yeah, those are the ones that stuck out to me. The rest are more or less pessimistic. So if you want to, I keep losing my microphone stand. So if you want any reason to not open a restaurant, you should definitely read this article. It's linked in the show notes for you. But the quotes kind of vary from things like rising costs to finding great people. But even like competition amongst restaurants and staff, I certainly found it valuable, kind of reading to those quotations. But I think it's important to make sure you have a pulse on these things to find out what the people that are in it and doing it have to say. And I think it's great that they're managing to have these hard conversations, right? Instead of having these classic like, "Hey, how are you? I'm good, busy. How are you?" Conversations that you hear sometimes. I think those are not productive, and there are more productive ways to kind of talk about the issues. So the next story that I want to talk about is actually a question from you guys. Connor wanted me to give my 2 cents on a story out of Portland. And the story there is that there was a spot called Cook's Burritos. And it was run by these 2 white girls, and I'm not sure this is going where you think it's going, but they closed after divulging to a local paper that they picked the brains, I'm quoting, they, quote, picked the brains of every tortilla lady there, which is in a place called Puerto Nuevo in Mexico, and I'm quoting again, in the worst broken Spanish ever. And so basically what they did, end quote, so what they did is they used those recipes that they picked from the brains of these tortilla ladies and opened their spot in Portland. And they bragged about it online, about where they got their ideas. They did the execution themselves back in Portland, and they started literally facing cultural appropriation charges and allegations. So hopefully you know where I'm going to go with this if you've been watching me for long enough, but in case this is your first time watching me, to me, what's hilarious is everybody's reactions online, right? So in this 2017 world where you're literally forced to be politically correct about everything, and people rarely read into it enough and just kind of fill the gaps when they read these headlines or hear these stories. They fill the gaps with, whatever the human mind can muster up. So whether that's racism or bigotry or ignorance, I think this is so crazy. So the article literally cites a spreadsheet that was made for Portland of like white-owned appropriative restaurants, right? And then alternatives of places that were owned by people of different ethnicities. Like, what is happening? It's so crazy. My example that I would like to give for this is, have you seen the episode of Chef's Table that's all about Ivan Ramen in New York City? It's literally a white guy making Japanese food just because he loves Japanese food, right? So at what my question that I pose is, at what point, what's the minimum length of time that you need to stay in a place to get the okay from whoever makes these decisions that you can make food in a different location, right? Like, would I personally get a ton of backlash if I opened a Nordic or Norwegian-inspired spot here in Seattle? I don't know. Like, I lived there for 2.5 years. Is that enough time, right? Like, the Ivan Ramen guy, I believe, if I'm not misquoting, he lived there for 10 years. And these girls spent who knows how much time in Puerto Nuevo, but apparently it wasn't enough, and people are getting huge backlash. And I know it's a given. Bragging like that, especially on the internet, is not going to get you anywhere good. And it was a poor choice of words on their part. And we're so intensely global right now. I just personally think that people cook best when they're cooking what they're excited about. So if these girls got excited about Mexican food and making authentic tortillas, or their version of authentic tortillas, that's what they're going to be excited about, and that's what's going to make their food good and interesting. At least I would like to hope. We can definitely get into the comments of this if you want, but because I love your take on this. I mean, there's so many countless examples of it, like people getting inspiration when they travel, and then coming back to their place where they either have their own roots or they decide that they want to set up shop, right? Grant Achatz and Gaghan literally both went to El Bulli, returned to their own choice of city, and then they straight up copied techniques, like saying that they copied it, whether or not they say it or not, it happened, and they've managed to achieve massive success with it, right? And they cite it as inspiration and part of their journey, not flaunting it in kind of a boisterous way as these girls more or less did. So people just need to chill out, right? There needs to be less peacocking, a little bit less, and from the chefs themselves. And then on the flip side, as kind of a consumer or an audience member or a guest, however you want to call it, I think there needs to just be less getting offended before you kind of put your voice out there and say things in whatever way you decide to say them. Just make sure you watch my show and that you get all sides of the story before you go out and share your opinion. Just get your thoughts in perspective. But this is the Emulsion, and I rely on your input here too, so keep me posted in the comments. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Ooh, new restaurant news. There was a lot of big reveals this past week. One of them, literally the afternoon, a few hours after I recorded last episode of the Emulsion, so I was a little bit pissed that I couldn't get that news out to you. Some of these are going to be a little bit of rapid fire style because we literally don't know that much yet. They were just some press releases, and some are going to be a little bit more detailed. And first up is no doubt probably the biggest one that I've certainly been waiting on is Dave Barron's spot Dialogue, which is scheduled to open in August in LA. It is a 800 square foot. They have 10 chairs at tables and 8 seats at a counter, so it's 18 seats total. It is his tasting menu bonanza that he's planning. So the food is going to be kaiseki inspired. I'm quoting super complex, end quote, are going to be his dishes that, quote again, you just want to literally lay down and take a nap in a bowl, end quote, in style. Adjusting the space itself, playing with the lights or perfuming the room, all of those kind of like plays are going to be forced upon you when you kind of enter that space. A lot of these concepts Chef Barron, of course, fell in love with and no doubt had a hand in developing when he was at Alinea and next after that. Of course, making these experiences a little bit more intimate in his own way by kind of like downsizing the dining room itself, right? I think Alinea has something like 40 or something seats. It's definitely not 18, but having that small space will allow him to do these things and make sure that he can kind of provide that overall experience to people much more controlled, right? So from all the articles I've read about it, everybody's sort of freaking out that it's in this space that's called 3rd Street Promenade, which is apparently a food hall or a mall in Santa Monica in LA. But personally, I mean, I'm all for this, right? I would love to have a space that utilizes something else at a different time, like at night, for example, because he's going to be serving dinner, right? Like we did that at Liesvacke, right? It was in a museum. So they would close at 4 and we would open at 5. And then we started lunch, but that's another story. Apparently the space that he has for Dialogue is nice and small, so he can keep things nice and intimate, and it's close to the farmer's market, and that basically led him to initially want to make it into a test kitchen. But upon going into the logistics, they just decided it'd be better for him to go pot committed, more or less, and make it a real restaurant. So having their hands in the test kitchen pot and then inviting people to come in as like a hint to a future restaurant more or less felt wrong, apparently, and that's what they kind of teased out of him in the interview. They also talk a little bit more about some problems that they may or may not have with that mall space, which we've literally talked before on this show, kind of keeping things isolated when you have that fine dining experience. They literally may or may not lock the doors to the space, so like once you're in, just to avoid, quote, a family in baseball caps with ice cream cones walking in to see what's inside, end quote. So Chef Barron ends the interview by saying, quote, "I know no matter what, this restaurant, if it's successful, which I obviously very much hope it is, otherwise I'm in trouble, will outgrow the space," end quote. And there's literally also hints a few days after that have come out of him opening a second spot in LA, which to me is crazy, right? I'm not even on like pop-up every month level, and he's planning 2 new restaurants. So bravo, Chef Dave. I'm working to get on your level. But if more news like that on that second restaurant gets dropped and you want to hear about it, go ahead and make sure you hashtag the Emulsion and tag me with that article. And I'll make sure to find it and cover it on the show and make sure I give my opinion. Next up, and super quick, I don't want to really spend a ton of time on this. The old Noma space is getting a little bit of a collaboration action between Chef Torsten Schmidt, who I actually had the pleasure of doing a guest chef dinner with at Least Vodka a few years ago. So he's going to be moving into that old Noma space, and they're going to open a new place called Bar, which is a 17-item a la carte menu focused spot. They're going to be doing quote-unquote casual new Nordic food, so they're not really going to deviate from a lot of the styles that they've grown to know and love. They're going to be serving traditional dishes that will pair great with collaborative beers with Scandinavian breweries, and they're also going to be pairing those with akvavit, which is, of course, a very Scandinavian spirit. They took that Noma space, added 30 new seats to the normal dining room, but they more or less want this space to be a spot where you would go often to eat with your family. They want to keep the check average low, but just keep it a nice, warm, comforting space. But for me, I would definitely have such hard nostalgia if I went back there. Dude, it'd be so crazy, right? That place is always going to be Noma for me, but it's good to hear that it's going to kind of stay within their family. Noma made sure that it went to a great chef, and I, of course, wish him and all of his team the best with that new project. Next up, Greg Backstrom, who's been on the show a couple times, friend of the show, is opening a 75-seat French bistro right across from his place Olmsted in Prospect Heights in Brooklyn. That's crazy, right? And that's literally all we know. It's scheduled to open by the end of the year. We'll see if that actually happens. I give Greg major props. He's grown incredibly fast with Olmsted. He's doing everything right. At least he's more on my speed with getting something stable and then thinking about another project. But I'm psyched to more or less see the menu for that space. I'd very much be interested in what Greg has in store for that bistro. If you have a guess on a name, I would love to hear it in the comments. Olmsted, I never would have seen him going that direction, naming it after the last name of an individual. So let me know what you think in the comments. Seattle is going to start taxing sodas. Yep, it's happening. We joined the Municipal Soda Tax Club last week. So that is 1.75 cents per ounce as a tax on drinks served inside the city with a certain level of sugar content. For me, I personally drink soda on the weekends, especially when I'm at a movie theater. Guilty. But I drink a ton of water and coffee and tea usually, so that this doesn't generally affect me that much. And I don't usually rely on serving sodas at my, any of the dinners that I do. But I know it's important, and I want to stress that you should know that it's happening. For me, it's a little bit more city specific. I don't think this will make me give up soda 100%. Maybe it will. A funny point that the article pointed out was that, quote, the big debate with Seattle's tax was whether to tax lattes sweetened with syrup. So the new law apparently exempts milk drinks, but obviously not sugary syrups. So this put sweetened lattes in a weird kind of limbo, end quote. I don't always put sugar in my coffee. Sometimes do. I don't really put sugar in my coffee. And I was just kidding earlier. Coke is my guilty pleasure. I will pay an extra few cents for that guilty pleasure of mine. But with that, they're also expected to make between 20 and 46 million by the end of the year on this new tax. So that in itself is pretty crazy. Next up is a piece from Grub Street that is actually right up my alley. It's talking all about how high-end chefs have embraced Instagram. So yes, 100 times yes. I'm just going to quote a little paragraph for you. Quote, the idea that restaurants would allow pictures at all very quickly gave way to customers actively courting Instagram attention. The chefs Grub Street spoke to for its story were reluctant to put hard numbers against a viral dish, and it likely varies too much among restaurants and dishes, but it's undeniable that new restaurants' lighting is designed to make food look better. We'd wager all those white marble tabletops are no coincidence. Chefs now craft dishes specifically for Instagram media appeal, and it's the golden age of food porn. Mario Batali himself describes the jamón de la bellota globe, slices of ham wrapped around a spherical candle that burns with a lardo flame, at La Sirena as an Instagram juggernaut. Another dish, a large format paella served tableside, is what used to be called a Kodak moment, is now Instagram fodder. End quote. And it's so true, right? So I remember back in the day when Brooklyn Fair, this spot in Brooklyn, was known as the spot not for allowing any other photos. There was, of course, a few restaurants in Spain that would never allow you to take any photos, and whether or not that was because of, kind of disturbing other diners, because these people would come in with tripods and lighting equipment, or because people would, I've also heard chefs didn't like it because people would take too long to eat the dish, or whether or not chefs wanted their dishes to be shared out there. Sometimes chefs are very protective of their food. If you didn't pay the head price for the menu, you shouldn't get to see what they're serving, was the kind of the mindset. But it doesn't matter anymore. It's pretty widely accepted now, at least to me and in my circle, right? I'm quoting the article again. In 2009, for example, chefs would have to go out to the restaurants themselves or wait until a cookbook came out to experience a dish or a technique that had been spread by word of mouth. And now they're interviewing David Posey of, Chicago fame. Now, Posey points out, Noma posts a new dish and you can start to see copies within days, end quote. For better or worse, part of the allure of high-end dining has always been a certain level of mystique and exclusivity. Fine dining is, by design, not for everyone. Armchair eaters watch entire tasting menus unfold on their phones and take video tours of storied dining rooms they know they will never visit, end quote. So we've talked about this before, and of course I'm all for it. Social media is so powerful when used as a tool to kind of scale word of mouth and your ideas and quality photography, and I'm personally super, super glad it's being accepted as such. Little water sipping action. Do you follow me on Instagram yet? That's something you should do. I'm just saying. At Justin Khanna. It's in the show notes. Here's a quote for you. Any chef who says they don't care about critics is either a liar or a fool, end quote. I've left an article in the show notes all about a cook giving a decently detailed recollection of cooking for Pete Wells, the New York Times restaurant critic, at Union Square Cafe. He wrote all about it. If you're a cook, you'll kind of get all the adrenaline feels, what that feels like to have the chef freaking out and the critic sitting down a few feet away. And if you're a diner, you'll kind of get a little sneak peek at all the care taken with VIPs. I'm not going to quote any of the story, just kind of leave it as something that you can enjoy in your own time. I'm going to do kind of a quickie version of the non-industry stories for today because I have other priorities. Let's see where we're at here. So yeah, I'm going to do a quickie version of the non-industry stories and simultaneously go live here on Instagram because I hyped up an unboxing, right? And maybe you're here for it. Maybe you joined the Facebook Live group for it. Or maybe you're here on Instagram because you saw that I posted about it. But that is going to technically be our last story. But while we wait for the Instagram live feed to fill up, the non-industry story for the week is a tie. It is a tie between iOS 11, which was announced at WWDC last week, Apple's developer conference, as well. So if you use iPhone, whether or not you're a chef or front of house person, there's a lot of great features that got announced and that you can kind of look forward to this fall. There's a huge recap of that I left in the show notes. Also, tied for that is the new Black Panther trailer. Can we talk about that for a second? So dope. Marvel movies keep killing it, and I'm super excited for the Black Panther movie coming out. The trailer is such a good reveal. It kind of shows a darker story. I tend to gravitate towards those darker Marvel movies. Welcome, Instagram fam. You're at the tail end of the Emulsion podcast. If you're just joining, it is being recorded. We're live on Facebook. We're live on Instagram. We're recording for the podcast that goes live on iTunes. But everything that I've just talked about is going to be in the show notes. I hyped up an unboxing in my Instagram story, and hopefully you're here for that. Regardless of whether you're here for that or not, we're doing it. So I'm going to kind of quickly spiel the story as I unbox it, because I kind of hate those places that just unbox things and just make you watch. So I have to read this. So Nick Muncy, who is the former pastry chef of Qua in San Francisco, announced his own chef-driven publication, and it's called Toothache. And what I have here is that first issue. Looks like that. That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like for everybody live and involved. So they're doing 2 issues of this every year. Sans, editors, or any outside media, which is super, super important. So Nick, of course, has tons of followers on Instagram, and he has his own blog that is very, very popular, where he publishes restaurant and chef quality recipes. So this is the first issue here. It is issue number 1. It says that right on the cover. And it apparently has 80 different recipes inside from San Francisco chefs and chefs only. And I'm just kind of, browsing through the first few pages. Maybe I should kind of rotate it around. Beautiful, beautiful photography so far from what I can see. He apparently did a lot of the work for the magazine itself himself. He learned how to do some skills in Adobe and went ham on this magazine. I'm gonna leave a link to the show notes in the show notes so you can buy this yourself. So I'm looking at how to make your own uni batarga, dill oil, buttermilk sauces, Earl Grey pork ribs with piccalilli and avocado. These are from restaurants all over San Francisco. Foie gras ice cream with tonka bean and tequila caramel. This is from Californios. This guy, Val Cantu, who is great. If you don't know who he is, you should, get on it. This is a very, very strange unboxing. So well done. My mic stand keeps falling. Well done to Nick Muncy. If you're in San Francisco, you can actually pick this up yourself at either Omnivore Books or this shop called The Human Condition, which I've never been to. But, I'm going to read this tonight for sure. If you have any questions for me on this magazine, go ahead and leave them in the comments wherever you're consuming this. But with only publishing 2 issues a year, maybe I should slow down on this. This is Nick Muncy, for everybody who doesn't know who he is. This is what he looks like. This is what he looks like. Yeah, maybe I need to slow down, wait, and see what they have in store for episode 2. But I'll keep you posted. I'm sure you'll see a bunch of feedback as everybody else gets their editions as well. But this has been an Emulsion unboxing, the first ever Emulsion unboxing. Regardless, this has been episode 17 of the Emulsion. Wherever you've been watching, live here, live there, live there. If you're on YouTube or maybe you're on the podcast on iTunes, I really, really want to thank you for listening. Please share this podcast on any of your social networks. I know there's someone you work with or someone you know that could use a little bit more industry knowledge, and we definitely talked about a lot of great stories today. Go ahead and tag me and use #TheEmulsion, and I'll be sure to say hi. Thanks in advance. I'm Justin Khanna. Have a good one.